An 80-year-old man lies in his bed, eyes open in the darkness, listening to his 3 children argue in the next room about how to divide his money. They think he's asleep. They think he's confused. They think he doesn't understand what's happening. They're wrong about all of it. What you're about to hear is the kind of story that makes you question everything you think you know about family. Because this isn't about strangers. This isn't about criminals or con artists. This is about 3 ordinary people who slowly, carefully convinced themselves that greed could look like love. And it's about the father who heard every single word. The house is quiet in that specific way a house gets quiet when everyone inside is trying not to sound guilty. It's late enough that the neighborhood has gone dark, late enough that the only lights still on are the soft ones, a hallway nightlight, the glow from a phone screen that keeps getting checked and quickly dimmed. Even the clock feels loud. Down the hall, behind a closed door, Harold Whitman lies in a hospital-style bed that his insurance helped pay for. Pill bottles crowd his nightstand. A glass of water sits untouched. A walker stands parked against the wall like a silent reminder of everything he used to be able to do without thinking. He's 80 years old, and for the past 6 months, his 3 adult children have been describing him with very careful words. Fragile, confused, slowing down. He hears those words when they think he can't. He hears them when they say them kindly, voices dripping with concern. He hears them when they say them like a strategy. Because tonight, all 3 of his children have gathered under his roof again, and they're trying very hard to pretend it's for him. But everything in the air tells a different story. Let me introduce you to the players in this tragedy. Evelyn is the oldest, 53. She moves through the living room like she owns it, like she's been managing everything all along. And in some ways, she has been. When their mother got sick 20 years ago, when the medical bills piled up and the fridge went empty before payday, Evelyn was the one who stepped up. She learned early how to make control look like love, and she never forgot how to use it. Marcus is the middle child, 48. He sits on the edge of the couch with his phone in his hand, thumb hovering over the screen. His knee bounces without stopping, a tell he's had since childhood. Marcus is the kind of man who measures life in outcomes, who needs numbers to feel safe. People like Marcus don't like waiting. They don't like uncertainty. They especially don't like when they can't calculate the answer. Then there's Lena, the youngest at 44. She stands by the window with her arms folded tight across her chest, watching the reflections in the glass more than the darkness outside. Her face looks calm until you notice her jaw, clenched so hard it could crack a tooth. Lena is quiet, not peaceful, careful, because Lena learned a long time ago that speaking too soon in this family just gives people something to twist. Bee's 3 siblings have been circling this moment for months now. Harold's health has been declining in small ways that add up. A fall in the bathroom last March, a missed doctor's appointment in June, confusion over an insurance letter he would have understood perfectly just 2 years ago. It's been enough for the siblings to start behaving like time is running out, as if the clock doesn't belong to him anymore, as if his life has turned into paperwork they need to file. But here's what makes this story different from every other inheritance drama you've heard. Harold isn't who they think he is. They're talking about his care. That's how it starts. Innocent enough, right? Doctor visits, medications, making sure he's eating properly. But then the conversation shifts. Evelyn starts listing everything she's done, every grocery run, every prescription pickup, every bill she's paid on his behalf. She doesn't say it outright, but every task becomes a receipt she wants someone to sign with gratitude, with acknowledgement, with a percentage. Marcus counters with what he's contributed: money, rent payments during Harold's rough months after retirement, the times he handled things when Evelyn couldn't. The problem is, Marcus talks about money like it's still working for him, like those payments have been accruing interest, like people are investments that pay dividends. Lena doesn't list much at all. She doesn't keep score like the others. She keeps glancing down the hall toward Harold's room, like she's waiting for something or someone to interrupt this. The argument is already happening, even if their voices stay low. And that's the first sign they know what they're doing is wrong. Because voices drop when people are ashamed. They start speaking in careful, shortened phrases, legal phrases. They mention Harold's condition, his capacity, his best interests. They talk about what he can't do anymore, what he might not understand, what could happen if he signed something too late. Then someone says the word, will, and suddenly the room feels like it shrunk by half. The air thickens. You could cut it with a knife, not that anyone in that room is being sharp enough to recognize what they're becoming. Evelyn's posture straightens. Marcus stops bouncing his knee, but not because he's calm, because he's focusing. Lena's eyes narrow, still silent, still watching. They talk about the house first. The house is the anchor, the asset, the 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom piece of property that Harold bought in 1981 for $47,000 and that Zillow now estimates at $340,000. It's the place where all 3 children learned to ride bikes in the driveway, where Harold fixed their scraped knees and grounded them for breaking curfew, where their mother's picture still hangs near the hallway, her smile frozen in 1998. The house holds their childhood in its walls. Now it also holds a price tag. They speak about selling it like they're discussing an old appliance. They speak about keeping it like they're talking about a trophy. They use the word fair so many times it stops meaning anything at all. Here's the thing that makes this uglier than it already is. At some point during the conversation, Harold stops being dad. He becomes him. Then the situation, then this. Lena's fingers tighten around the edge of the curtain until her knuckles go bone white. Marcus leans forward and scrolls through something on his phone, property value estimates, account balances, like his father is already a spreadsheet waiting to be finalized. Evelyn's eyes flash with a specific kind of anger, the kind that comes from believing your sacrifices entitle you to a reward, that suffering earns you control. Then someone brings up the nursing home, not as a possibility, as a negotiating chip. If dad goes into care, the house can be handled faster. The sentence is whispered, but it lands like a gunshot. If he goes, the paperwork becomes easier. If he goes, decisions become ours. And there it is, the line you can't step back over without changing who you are. For a moment, no one speaks. The weight of what just was said hangs in the air like smoke. Then the rationalizations begin. Because rationalizations are what people use when they don't want to face what they've become. He'd be safer in a facility. He'd have round-the-clock care. We're just being realistic. Every excuse sounds reasonable in isolation. That's how it works. That's how good people do terrible things, one justified decision at a time. The siblings are so focused on each other, so consumed by their careful negotiations, that none of them notice a faint sound from down the hall. A slow inhale, a shift of weight, a bed creaking. Harold isn't asleep. He hasn't been asleep for a while. He lies in the darkness with his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening to every single word they think they're hiding. His hearing isn't perfect anymore, he'll admit that. His body is slower than it used to be, but his mind is awake, and his heart is steady enough to recognize betrayal when it walks into his home and sits on his couch. He's listening, not in confusion, in absolute clarity. He recognizes the rhythm of their argument. He recognizes the way Evelyn always needs control, the way she weaponizes her caretaking. He recognizes the way Marcus always wants an outcome, a number, a conclusion. He recognizes the way Lena goes silent when she's hurt, just like she did when she was 7 and her siblings gained up on her.
Some patterns never change. He hears the way their love has become conditional, transactional. He hears his life being divided up like a pie chart, and something in him goes cold. Not with hatred, not with rage, with understanding. This isn't just about money. It's about who they are when they think no one is watching. Let me tell you something about Harold Whitman that his children seem to have forgotten. A long time ago, longer than any of them have been alive, Harold built his life on simple principles. Work hard, keep your word, protect your family. He wasn't a saint. He made mistakes. He wasn't always gentle. He worked too many hours and missed too many recitals. He was strict when maybe he should have been softer.
But he believed in effort. He believed that character was what you did when there was nothing to gain. He believed that how you treated people when they were vulnerable said everything about who you really were. Tonight, lying in that bed, Harold realizes his children have been living by a completely different set of rules, and they don't even know it. That realization settles in his chest like a stone. But here's what separates Harold from most people in his situation. He doesn't storm out of his room, he doesn't announce himself, he doesn't shout or cry or demand an explanation. Because Harold has learned something in 80 years that his children still don't understand. The loudest person in a conflict isn't always the one with power. So he waits, he listens, he remembers, and he begins to plan. In the living room, the argument shifts from the house to the money. Retirement funds, savings accounts, the life insurance policy their mother set up 30 years ago, the small investment Harold made in a friend's business in 1995 that somehow grew into something worth actual money. They speak as if these things appeared from thin air, as if they weren't built with decades of overtime shifts and sacrificed vacations and long, quiet mornings of responsibility. The tension rises. Someone accuses someone else of already having taken something. Someone brings up an old debt from 2003. Someone says fair again as if repetition makes it true. Lena finally moves away from the window and steps closer, like she's being pulled into the fight against her will. Her eyes flick toward the hallway one more time, fear and anger mixing behind them. But she still doesn't speak much, not because she has nothing to say, because she's hearing what they're actually saying, and she's realizing how little of it sounds like family anymore. In the hallway, Harold closes his eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, from decision. The next morning, the house is bright with an uneasy calm. The siblings move around each other like strangers, pretending not to be strangers. The coffee smells too sharp. The sunlight through the kitchen window feels like exposure. Harold appears slowly, carefully, leaning on his walker. His face is neutral, his eyes quiet. He looks to any observer exactly like the man they've been describing. Old, tired, fragile. And the way their expressions shift when he enters the room, softening, sweetening, performing, is almost worse than the argument itself. He sits at the table, takes his time, drinks his water, eats a little toast, lets them fuss over him. He watches them. He watches Evelyn rearrange his napkins like she's staging a scene for social media. He watches Marcus ask practical questions while pretending not to calculate. He watches Lena hover near him, touching his shoulder once, gently, as if to remind herself he's real. Harold says very little. He doesn't need to say much. He only needs to give them the illusion that they still control the narrative. Later that afternoon, he makes a phone call from his room. Not with dramatic urgency, with the same calm he used to use when calling the bank about a late payment, the same tone he used when telling his children to stop fighting and do what was right. He calls his attorney, a man named Richard Kaplan, someone he's known for 15 years, someone who doesn't confuse age with weakness. Harold doesn't spill emotion into the call. He doesn't need to. He lays out facts, what was said, what was implied, what was planned. And then he asks for something specific. A meeting. Private. Soon. Richard Kaplan arrives 2 days later. Clean suit, leather briefcase, a neutral expression trained by 30 years of dealing with difficult families. Harold's children assume the meeting is routine, estate planning, paperwork updates, standard stuff for someone his age. That assumption is a gift Harold doesn't correct. They hover, trying to insert themselves into the conversation, trying to be helpful, trying to be present in the room where decisions happen. Harold politely denies them without raising his voice, and they back off with smiles that don't quite reach their eyes. The door closes, and for the first time in a long time, Harold allows himself to exhale fully. Inside that room, he does what he's always done when something truly matters. He prepares. He asks for bank statements, not a summary, everything, every transaction for the past 18 months. He asks for records of transfers, checks, withdrawals, payments. He asks for dates. And as pages are laid out across his desk, a pattern starts to emerge. Small enough to hide in ordinary life, large enough to hurt when seen clearly. A few withdrawals here and there that Harold doesn't remember authorizing. $700 in March, $400 in June, $900 in September. A signature that looks like his, but not quite. The H is too round, the W slants the wrong way. A payment made to a home care service he never used. 3 months of charges, $1,200 each for services never rendered. The kind of things that can be explained away individually until they stack up. Harold doesn't need to accuse anyone. He doesn't need a confession. He doesn't need confrontation. He only needs the truth. And the truth is sitting there in black ink on white paper. It isn't the amount that breaks his heart. It's $8,300 total, not enough to ruin him, but enough to reveal intent. It's knowing that someone, maybe more than one someone, looked at him and saw an opportunity instead of a father. His mind moves steadily, the way it always has. He feels the pain, yes, that particular kind of grief that comes from being betrayed by someone you raised. But he doesn't let pain drive the steering wheel. He makes changes, not out of revenge, out of clarity. He rewrites his will, but not in the way people expect. He doesn't simply punish. He doesn't simply reward. He doesn't turn it into a morality play with easy villains and heroes. He turns it into a mirror. Harold creates conditions, carefully crafted, legally airtight, that will reveal who his children truly are when the money is close enough to touch. He builds accountability into every single line. He adds transparency requirements, documentation, timelines, independent verification. He ensures no one can claim ignorance. No one can hide behind confusion or, "I thought Dad wanted this." He makes it impossible for greed to masquerade as love. Then he creates one more detail, one final layer that only someone paying very close attention will understand. He includes a provision that will not activate unless certain behavior occurs. A trap, not for the innocent, a trap for the dishonest. When Richard Kaplan leaves that afternoon, Harold sits alone for a while. The house hums softly around him. The refrigerator, the heating system, the small sounds of a place that's been lived in for 43 years. He stares at a framed photograph on his dresser. His children at different ages. Evelyn at 16, trying to look serious. Marcus at 12, grinning with a missing tooth. Lena at 8, holding a trophy from some long-forgotten competition. Frozen in time before adulthood complicated them. Harold doesn't cry, but something in him grieves quietly. Because rewriting a will is easy. Rewriting a family isn't. A week later, Harold asks his children to come over. Not for a fight, not for a lecture. He asks as if he needs them, as if he's still dependent, as if he still doesn't know what he knows. They arrive quickly, all three, drawn by the same invisible magnet that pulled them into the first argument. They walk into the living room and that old tension returns immediately, like the room remembers. Harold sits in his chair, blanket over his knees, hands resting calmly on the armrests. An envelope lies on the coffee table. Not flashy, not dramatic, just a standard manila envelope with Richard Kaplan's firm name in the corner.
but it changes the atmosphere anyway, because paper is power. The attorney is there too, seated off to the side, professional, quiet. He doesn't smile, he doesn't frown. He simply exists as a neutral witness, which makes everyone behave differently. Harold watches his children's faces as they sit down. Evelyn's eyes flick to the envelope and back to Harold, trying to read him like she's been doing since she was old enough to know that reading people gave you control. Marcus shifts in his seat, trying to appear relaxed, failing completely. His knee starts bouncing again. Lena's expression is guarded, but her gaze stays on Harold longer than the others, like she's searching for something in him. Permission, maybe, or warning. Richard Kaplan begins. He explains, without warmth or coldness, that Harold has requested updates and clarifications to his estate plan. The children listen with a hunger they're trying desperately not to show. The first few points are ordinary enough, standard stuff, enough to keep them believing this will go exactly the way they expected. Then the terms begin. The house, not sold immediately, held in trust, managed by an independent party, Richard's firm. Available to them under strict conditions. Maintenance and taxes will be paid out of a designated fund, but only if they cooperate, only if they adhere to specific agreements, only if they stop treating it like a prize and start treating it like a responsibility. A ripple of discomfort runs through the room. Then the accounts, not divided in clean, satisfying thirds like they'd imagined.
Structured, staggered, portioned based on documented caregiving, verified support, and, here's the word that lands like a stone, transparency. Because transparency is what liars fear most. Marcus's jaw tightens. Evelyn's fingers curl slightly into the couch cushion. Lena's eyes widen just a fraction, as if she's realizing Harold is not doing what they anticipated at all. Then Richard reads the part about the withdrawals. Not an accusation, just a fact. A record. A list. Dates. Amounts. Account numbers. The room's temperature drops 10 degrees. Harold watches as the siblings process what's happening. He watches denial flash across one face. He watches panic rise in another. He watches anger start to bloom. Not righteous anger, but the anger of exposure. Richard continues, his voice never changing tone. Harold has included a provision that any money taken without authorization will be deducted from that person's inheritance. Not later, not after probate, not after appeals. Immediately. No negotiation, no argument. Because the math is already done. Someone shifts sharply on the couch. Someone's breathing changes audibly. Richard pauses only to turn the page. Then comes the final layer, the one Harold built for the exact moment greed reveals itself completely. A clause stating that any contest of the will, any attempt to challenge the terms in court without evidence of wrongdoing by Harold or the attorney will trigger a separate set of consequences. That person's share will be redirected, not to another sibling, not to some charity nobody cares about, but to something deeply personal. A fund in Harold's late wife's name, Sarah Whitman. A scholarship program for nursing students at the local community college where Sarah once took classes when the kids were small, where she dreamed of becoming a nurse before life and money and raising 3 children made her set that dream aside. A legacy that cannot be argued against in a courtroom without looking like exactly what they are. Greedy. The air in the room feels thin, hard to breathe. Harold remains absolutely still. He doesn't gloat, he doesn't grin, he doesn't relish this moment, because this isn't entertainment for him. It's the last defense he has left. One of the siblings starts to react, hands lifting, posture rising, the body language of someone about to demand, accuse, fight back. The same energy that filled the room the night Harold listened from his bed. But Harold doesn't meet it with the same energy. He stays quiet. He lets the paper speak. He lets the facts stand. And that, more than a speech, more than a lecture, communicates the truth. He saw them, he heard them, he understood them, and he acted accordingly. Evelyn's eyes glisten with something complicated, hurt and humiliation and the shock of losing control all mixed together. Marcus's face tightens as if he's doing mental calculations in real time, searching for a loophole, searching for an angle, realizing the trap is built into the very structure of the document. Lena looks as if she might crumble, not because she's losing money, because she's watching a family finally become on the outside what it's been for years beneath the surface. Broken. Richard finishes. The room sits in silence so thick you could drown in it. No one seems to know what to do with the fact that the man they thought was fading, the man they thought they could manage and manipulate, has outmaneuvered them without ever raising his voice. Harold watches them for a long moment, like he's memorizing this version of them too, because this might be the last time he sees them honestly. His chest rises and falls, slow, controlled. He turns his gaze toward the hallway where a framed photo of Sarah still hangs. Her smile, her eyes, the woman who would have been heartbroken to see this moment. Then he looks back at his children, still calm, still present, still listening. The meeting ends without the closure that movies try to offer. It ends with people leaving in stiff silence, carrying emotions they don't have names for yet. Evelyn walks out first, shoulders rigid, dignity held together by sheer force of will. Marcus follows, jaw clenched, already thinking about what can be done, what can be argued, what loopholes might exist. Lena lingers a moment longer, her eyes on Harold, like she wants to say something she can't form without shattering completely. She hesitates at the doorway, then steps out into the afternoon light. And Harold is alone again. He sits in his chair and listens to the house settle around him. He listens to the distant sound of a car starting. He listens to footsteps fade away down the driveway. He doesn't feel victorious. He feels tired, but not defeated. Because for the first time in months, he isn't being treated like an object to be managed. He isn't being spoken about like he's already gone. He has reclaimed what mattered most: agency. Outside, life continues as if nothing happened. The street stays quiet. The neighborhood remains polite. No one knows what was said in that living room, what was revealed, what was lost. But inside Harold's home, something has shifted permanently. Not the money, the truth. Because the truth has a weight that even inheritance can't match. So here's the question this story leaves you with. If you were Harold, 80 years old, still alive, still listening, what would you have done? Would you have tried to keep the peace? Would you have pretended you didn't hear? Would you have let it go to keep your family intact? Or would you have written the truth into the only document they couldn't ignore? Leave your answer in the comments because something tells me this one's going to divide people. And if this story made you think, made you feel something, made you want to call your own parents, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more stories like this coming. Stories about what people become when they think no one's watching.